Chris Leatt-Hayter, Chief Executive Officer of Fremantle Ports, joined Fremantle Ports in 1992 with tertiary qualifications in economics. So this will be the second economist we hear from today. Prior to his appointment CEO in 2008, Chris occupied the position of General Manager of Strategic and Commercial Development at Fremantle Ports for 13 years. During his time there, Chris has played a major role in planning for the future growth in the port such that it can effectively fulfil its role of trade facilitation. He was also involved in the commercialisation of the port's operations to achieve a more commercial orientation and customer-focused approach to the port's business. Prior to joining Fremantle Ports, he worked at the Western Australia Treasury, Department of Transport, wide-ranging experience in transport policy development, contract negotiations, economic and financial evaluation and business development planning. Chris has been actively involved in a number of boards and committees and is currently Deputy Chairman of Ports Australia, Deputy Chairman of the West Australian Motor Industry Foundation and a member of the Freight and Logistics Council of Western Australia. Chris is a member of the Chartered Institute of Transport, Australian Institute of Management and the Australian Institute of Company Directors. Please join me in welcoming Chris to the stage.
Great. Thanks very much, Sean, and thank you everyone for coming along this morning to listen to me. I'm a mad Dockers supporter. I was very pleased to see that Sean had been helping out Sydney and Geelong, and I hope that this conference gives you more than what they got out of the whole program. I said to Sean yesterday when I met him that I was glad the conference was on Wednesday, because if it was on, I had a look when I was asked to do it where the grand final was, because I knew the Dockers would be in the grand final. And I'm glad it's on a Wednesday. So I'm looking forward with a whole lot of friends and others going over to Melbourne on Friday night and hopefully to share success. I hope there's a lot of Dockers supporters here today, because I've got a few Dockers stories I'll tell on the way through. I've been at Fremantle Ports for over 20 years, had a great time there, thoroughly enjoyed the organisation and all the time that I've been there. It's been very much a learning organisation. It's something that, we never sit back and sort of think, it's all done, there's nothing more to do. The organisation's evolved a lot over that 20 years, and what I want to do this morning is to sort of share that journey with you. That journey, although it's a long one, I'm going to try and cram it into about 45 minutes. I will talk about the evolution of the organisation, how we've changed our business model, and how we've embraced and worked with staff to bring about that change. And this change wouldn't come about without having that staff involvement. And a lot of the credit for the change and success that we've had goes with our past CEO, who would be known to many of you, Kerry Sanderson. Kerry came there in 1991, a year before myself, and I guess was really instrumental in placing the foundation to the change that we had. So up front, I'll give Kerry that credit, which I think is really, really important, and hopefully I can give you the story that we've had over the last 20 years or so. I've seen some of my people here today, but there's a lot, most of you be West Australian, but a lot of people don't know much about Fremantle Ports other than perhaps where it is down in Fremantle. So I want to spend, the first couple of minutes just telling you quickly about our business and to give you some sense of familiarity with it before I move into the other part of my talk. I think most of you might be aware where we are, but I guess many of you might not be aware that our responsibility also extends down into KWINANA. Overall, we have a water area of about nearly 400 square kilometres where shipping is managed. We have facilities in the inner harbour, which I'll touch on in a minute, as well as the outer harbour, where we have 5 jetties where we manage the operations at those jetties. The port itself is very much a mixture of public and private service provision and investment. We are the strategic manager of the port. We are involved in a number of things like the planning for the port, the development of the port. Some service provision we're still involved in, taking pilots out to ships, doing mooring of ships, and in KWINANA actually doing some bulk handling. But we've also got the private sector involved in a big way. The container stevedores, the towage companies, the pilots are all private sector. So it's a business that's quite a complex business in terms of the people that are involved in it. Most of you know the facilities in Fremantle where we handle the container trade on North Quay. We also are very important, to the state in terms of the port. We're a lot of machinery for the agricultural industry and the mining industry, and we've seen massive growth in that sort of trade in recent years. Cruise shipping, everyone loves the cruise ships. We don't make a lot of money out of them, but they're tremendous in terms of what they bring to Fremantle and to the state economy. The car carriers that come through, you'll see the motor vehicles stacked up on Victoria Quay, and it's quite amazing. Each of those carriers can bring up to 4,000 to 5,000 motor vehicles at a time when they come into the port. Down in KWINANA, there's 3 jetties that are privately owned and operated. They're associated largely with refineries or other things behind them. The Alcoa refinery jetty, the BP oil refinery jetty where there's crude petroleum imported and refined petroleum exported, and the CBH grain jetty, which is obviously a major facility for the export of grain around the world, and that does about 4 million tonnes of grain each year. Down at KWINANA there are also 2 facilities that are, we call them common user bulk facilities, that we actually own and operate. The KWINANA Bulk Terminal, that's actually an interesting story in itself, what I won't go into, but that was previously owned by BHP, and in 2002, which is quite a different story, as opposed to, I guess, the privatisation of government departments, we actually, as a government agency, bought out a private operation, being the BHP port operation down there. And that was associated with a project called the High Smelt Project, that some of you might have heard of. Ended up belly up, but it's a facility that we've kept now for the last 10 years and developed, and it handles a variety of products, exporting iron ore, coal, importing clinker, cement clinker, exporting gas, so a whole range of products through there. And that other facility, another common user facility, the KWINANA Bulk Jetty at the front, is another one with a bit of a mixture of private and public. We own it, do some operations, and we have the private sector operating from that facility as well. Just to put our business in perspective, overall we handle about 32 million tonnes of trade per annum. The value of that trade in each year is about $30 billion. And I guess, not when I'm talking to you very, very well and educated and knowledgeable people, but talking to the punters, I guess I put it in terms of $3 million worth of trade passes through the port every hour of every day. And I think just that helps people appreciate the important role that the port plays in the overall state economy. We've had good growth in most of our trades. The container trade, which most of you would be aware of, we've had an average annual growth rate since 97, 98 of about 6.8%. That fluctuates a lot, like a lot of other businesses. Some years it's really flat, other years it can be 10, 12%, but it's a reasonable overall average annual growth rate over that time. I guess in terms of our importance also, you can see in terms of the seaborne imports coming into the state the role we play. And as I said, that's for everyday consumers, whether it's for motor vehicles or plasma TVs or bathroom tiles or whatever it might be. From an export perspective, we certainly have the grains and other things going out and containerised products. But by value, obviously the Northwest with its iron ore production is the dominant export port for the value of trade going through Western Australia. Our focus, and I'll touch on this a few times today, I see as being quite simple, and I think having that simplicity in terms of what your business is about is critical in terms of getting people to be able to engage and to follow, I guess, the strategy and vision that you have for the organisation. We're a port, quite simply our mission and our vision is about facilitating trade. However, we wanted to do that and make sure that we do it in the most efficient way and make sure that we do it in a cost-effective way. And I think the other big role that we have is to make sure that we plan effectively for the future growth and development of the port. And I'll touch on that at the end, but you can see that picture of Fremantle in 2008. We undertook a major harbour deepening campaign where we took the port down another 1.5 metres. You probably saw that well publicised in the paper in terms of the plumes that were caused by the limestone. There was nothing harsh in it, but I guess it was something that put the port into a bit of profile. From that, not only did we do the deepening so that we could accommodate the larger ships, but we created another 28 hectares of land at Rouse Head, which is critical for the operations of the port to be able to grow into the future. So now if I sort of take you on our journey, as I said, 25 years, I'll labour on more points, some points more than others, but it has been a really incredible journey for those that have been involved in it all the way through, and there are some people in the audience today that have been on that. But it's been something that I think we look back on and we can learn from things that we've done, and hopefully there's some things that you'll be able to learn from the lessons that we've had as well. If you go back into the late 1980s, into the early 1990s, the organisation was a large, bulky, heavy organisation, had over 800 employees, 14 unions, and about 23 federal and state awards to deal with. Now, from a union perspective, the waterfront is always really, really highly unionised, and I know certainly a lot of other industries, the rail industry, Paul Larson here today and others, they had that same sort of framework, and it's a very difficult framework to operate within. Today we really basically deal with one or two unions and only a few awards, so it makes it a lot easier. The culture that was there in the past, which I guess would be common to many heavy industries as well, was something very entrenched in a workforce and embedded. The workers had been there for a long time, many of them 30, 40, 50 years, and we've still got a lot of long-serving employees today. But I guess with a number of those people and the jobs they were in, there was significant resistance to change. Limited customer focus. A lot of them wouldn't have even known who the customers were. They were Fremantle Port Authority. They had a job, they went to their job, and I don't think in many cases there was a realisation of just what that customer base was and how important the jobs that they were providing. There was certainly job preservation and protection, and with that, the other part down there, very, very narrow job definition. So if you had a job, you did your job, and it was a very, very limited scope. I won't go into the details, but if you had to pick up one box and put it there, before you could do that, someone else would be bringing that box, and it was, if you were an electrician and went somewhere, someone else had to come and do something. So enormous demarcation in all the roles, very, very narrow job definition in terms of people and what they were supposed to do. Certainly in terms of promotion, and it still existed in certain parts of the waterfront until very, very recently, it was on seniority and not merit. So the longer you were there, the higher you went, and if you didn't matter how you performed or anything else, it was just you had to wait in line until the next bloke left before you went up. Very much it was a government agency like the railways, again, Paul not having a crack at Brookfield, but for the West Rail and other things where I guess it was insulated from competition. Fremantle Port did everything down on the wharf, and didn't matter whether it did it good or bad, it was doing it, and it had historically done it, and it was continuing to do it. With that, there was insulation from competition, no real performance focus, limited accountability, and not a great lot of vision about where we're going in the future. A common opinion 25 years ago, and this was a quote that someone dragged me out of from HR, that's why it's in quotes: why do you need to advertise for jobs? My brother or cousin can come and do it. And it was legendary. You know, if you did actually play for South Fremantle or East Fremantle, you were just about first in line for a job when it came up. And that's changed hugely now. It's just the dockers that get a job. So, but that's the sort of thing that I think was the general thing. And I guess when I came there in 1992, I was about the second person that had come from outside in decades. And, you know, in terms of talking about what that meant, and some people here were here before me and they can relate to it, but I went into a job and I was planning manager and group managing a property section and some other areas. And the guy said, what the hell would you know, mate? You wouldn't have a frigging clue. You haven't worked here for that long, blah, blah, blah. And I was like, I'm not reporting to you, and that's the end of it. And so I said, fine, it's going to be an easy job for me. And it took me ages to sort of break down that culture and get the guys to respond and to listen and to value new people coming into the organisation. When the change, I mean, with that sort of climate and background, the need for change was very, very clear. I mean, it wasn't just Fremantle that was suffering this. I think if you looked around ports around Australia, it was a pretty similar situation. The state and Commonwealth government had policies for IR reform. Customer feedback was bad. All the benchmarking with international ports showed that we're probably about at a quarter of performance compared to what they might be. And the most important thing, we were losing money. And that's not sustainable for a government organisation that doesn't get funding from the government. You get it from the customers. And I guess, you know, it was shown in that year, in 1991, we lost $14 million operating profit. So we needed to do something. And as I said, Kerry was really brought in at that time to help bring about this change. That saw us really change our role and our focus to say, we don't have to do everything. We need to really change the way we operate and see ourselves more as something that's a strategic port manager. And that was a new term at that time. It doesn't sound all that fancy or anything at the moment, but instead of sort of just having to do everything, we actually looked at what the port involved and thought about how best we could run that port. So that saw us exiting from a lot of services. Pilots, we used to do the pilotage, we outsourced it all. Stevedoring, we used to do a lot of it, it was outsourced. Now, it wasn't just haphazard and removal of services and functions. Each one was looked at in a great lot of detail to see where there was benefit in going outside, where there was strong competition from the private sector and better performance from that. So a lot of change came in terms of the movement of staff, redundancy and the like. But over that and through that change, we significantly changed the workforce profile, got new expertise in, a lot of new blood, and it was something that initial change happened pretty quickly, and I guess it was then embedding and growing on from that change and getting the results that we wanted to take place. And it was quite significant. I mean, at that time, the workforce went from about 800 to probably about 200, 250, and then down to 160 in a very, very limited time. So a massive change in the way that the organisation operated. Now, I guess you needed something, though, to help embed that change and to, I guess, implement it and bring about the success and initiatives that you were trying to achieve. And in doing that, we adopted what's known as the Australian Business Excellence Framework. It wasn't known at that time. I think it was just the Business Excellence Framework. Are many people in the room familiar with the framework? Only a few hands. Well, I was just talking to others. In terms of bringing about change, and I'll certainly be talking about the cultural change in a while, but this part here, in terms of an overall business and how you operate, we found absolutely invaluable. It's something that is based on a number of principles, 8 principles, which are up there, and I'll quickly go through some of them. But it really set a foundation and framework within which the organisation could then change and develop. Each of those different pillars, while separate, have a whole lot of focus and tasks within them that help guide you to elevating your performance in each of those areas. Leadership and strategy being the first pillar, certainly talking about the need for the organisation to have clear direction and agreed plans and very much an organisation alignment and focus on achieving goals. Customers and stakeholders, really understanding what their needs are, what their requirements are now and in the future, and then thinking about what you can do to address it. Your systems thinking and improvement, making sure that you have the right processes in place so that you can address things. And the organisation at that time, we didn't really have a lot. There was a lot of things that were absent, and we spent a lot of time in this area making sure that people understood the systems, we had good processes and procedures and the like, and certainly getting people not just to accept those, but to continue to work on improving those. With the people, having gone through such a significant change, making sure that people had the ability and enthusiasm to contribute to the organisation and its success. A lot of work in this area, and we did really, really well. I think that over that initial period, we really built up people's ability to contribute. We had a lot of training programs. We engaged a lot. We were a very, very good employer from that perspective, and I think it really, really was the critical thing in helping drive improvement. Innovation and learning, a really important thing to make sure that, again, that people are thinking ahead, are willing to put up new ideas and improvements, and certainly learn from mistakes that are there, which we never really, like most people, you won't treat as great mistakes, but look at ways of trying to learn from that and to improve the next time you do it. Information and knowledge, and this is the one I think everyone that's worked at the port for a long time with myself, Kerry's words are always ringing in my ears. Everything has to be based on data and analysis. If you don't have that data and analysis and think about things properly in a constructive way, your decision making is flawed. And it is a critical thing, obviously, in a business, all businesses where you do this, to make sure that you have it and that you use it properly in your decision making. Sustainable performance, realising that you're here for the future, the long term, and that your impacts are wider than just on your own business. Obviously, you've got government, from our perspective, government stakeholders and shareholders. You've got many people in the community that you deal with, and you've got many stakeholders from industry, local government and other government that you have to deal with as well. So, I guess the bars in terms of environmental performance and safety and community interaction are very, very important things that should help drive your business. And leadership and culture in an organisation, you're never going to bring about these things. You need the people on board, but you certainly need a well-trained, focused, enthusiastic, energetic leadership team to help drive the change. A CEO will never do it by himself. You need to have that. And luckily, we've had that, a tremendous leadership group at Fremantle Ports that's able to embrace and wanting to embrace that change and help bringing about excellence in the way that they operate. So, as I said, I'd highly recommend people having a look at that if they're looking at major change, but it really sets an organisation up in a very structured and constructive way to look about change and look about continual improvement through the organisation. The journey on us through that was long, and I guess keeping enthusiasm and motivation sometimes was difficult, but it was embraced, and I guess people very much enjoyed the success and the rewards that came along. We went through a lot of self-assessment, we went through a lot of assessment by external assessors, and it was a long journey but an enjoyable journey, and you can see some of the awards all the way along. I guess the pinnacle in the end in 2007, I think we were the first or the second organisation in Western Australia to get a gold award under this framework. Certainly the first port in Australia, and I guess it really helped us in terms of, through the organisation, showing the people that it was actually something that was worthwhile. And I think the most important thing about it as you went through that journey was not the fact, and there's some very rigorous criteria and all to follow. That hard work in meeting that criteria, putting it into application, was the most important thing. And that's something that I think you never get to until you really get to the end level. And pleasingly today I can stand here and say that all those things with customers, stakeholders, leadership and the like are well embedded in the organisation as something that's just a normal part of practice of our business. So that's something that, while the hard work's there and you're doing it, it's great to see the results coming at the end. They were the trophies, and interestingly I went to a talk the other night where Kerry was talking about her life, and she was allowed to put 8 slides up on the screen, and that was one of the slides she had there. So that's how much it's meant to her career, what she was able to achieve with the people at Fremantle Ports in terms of ABF. And there's something that are in our boardroom today, and something that, we're not great trophy hunters, but in terms of when you put so many years into it, it's great to know that you get that recognition for the hard work that's done. As well as doing that, I think in running a business like Fremantle Ports, which is very much in a heavy industry environment, you've got to make sure that you have the right accreditation and the like. And I think this is another, people that have gone through the ISO accreditation, I think I'd highly recommend that again to get your people focused on what's best practice and bringing about change in an organisation. So that journey was long but rewarding, and I think at the end of it there was clear success. Certainly there was from all those facets. There was great customer feedback, performance was a lot better, we were making money, trade was growing, employees were satisfied, the business was going really well. And that took time, but certainly through the 2000s, the late 90s and in the early 2000s, all those satisfaction things and all those the results were there. Then we came to 2008, and I'm not trying to be over dramatic here, but I guess I'd been there for a long time, was sort of in a general manager position for 13 years, and I'd always aspired to be CEO, and I think I'd worked hard to make sure I had the opportunity to get that job. I applied for it, and it took quite a while, but I ended up getting the job, which I was delighted about. I thought, great, all the hard work's been done, we'd won all the trophies, trade was booming, it was a fantastic environment to be in, and not that I was going to slack off, but we certainly thought that all the hard work had been done and it should be pretty easy from here on. The reality hit very quickly. One thing I was always somewhat daunted about was the fact that Kerry was so successful when I was taking over from her. So I've got a different leadership and management style to Kerry. The people that I work with sort of were quite aware of that. But I guess it was a daunting challenge from a personal perspective when you've taken over from someone that's been so successful, just how are you going to manage when she's not there? The organisation was successful. Then some other things happened. We got a new government, we got a new minister, got a new chairman. And that to me were all challenges that I had to deal with. And I guess I saw the analogy about hailstorms. I had bricks in terms of the GFC. It was enormous, the impact on our business. And there were very, very strong reason for me to think about the future and what we were doing. I posed the question at the end, was this a good thing or a bad thing? I won't answer it now, but I'll hopefully the story that I'll continue to tell, will give you some insight into that. This is a graph that was actually presented to me by one of my staff members, who's in the audience today. And it was really, really funny to these guys. They thought it was hilarious that they'd come up and say, and actually one part that's taken over, missing from it is when it's on the incline, it's got Kerry Sanderson's period of CEO where it's growing, and then Chris Leatt-Hayter takes over at this time, and this is what's happened. But this was the truth, and there was something that we really needed to do about it. And this is just illustrative of the motor vehicle trade. It was across all the trades, and I guess there was a need for an immediate response to try and address that. You couldn't just sit back and say, well, it's going to recover overnight. You'd be broke. You'd be broke in 10 minutes if you just took that attitude. So from my perspective, that gave a real impetus for change. I sat around and we talked about it at exec, but what we really saw was to make sure that, again, organisational alignment and agreement on what you were doing, in my mind, was the most important thing to do. We certainly had a lot of things that we were doing at that time. Not only the trade had gone down, but we were just embarking on one of our biggest capital works programs for decades. We're about to spend $250 million deepening the harbour, hoping that the ships and the trade would keep coming. And we had a lot of other projects that we were working on. Clearly, we made sure that for each of those, we looked at them very, very carefully. Those things there, making sure they were scoped right, resourced right, doing everything. There's just disciplines that we introduced that I think when you're going through a period of growth and success and everything's fine, slip. And I know, talking to a lot of other CEOs, they had that same sort of, imperative to bring about improvement in some of those disciplines. Certainly, when you are doing well, sometimes things aren't questioned so much, and I think bringing back that level of questioning was really, really important. So very much we sat down and said everything we do from now on has got to be clearly focused on stuff that's adding value to our business and our customers' businesses, and we were brutal in terms of the way we looked at a lot of the expenditure and things that we did. We put together a strategic plan, and this was my first one back there, and we made sure that it was no more than a page. I'm not expecting you to be able to read it, but in the third sort of bar, we had about 15 priority projects, and that was the only focus that I wanted to get across to the organisation. I said, forget about the rest, I don't even want to hear about them if they're at the expense of what's in those priority projects. And that was something that we really, really went through in great detail, made sure we had good ownership at the executive level, and then right through the staff, so that everyone knew what those priority projects were and what their contribution was to those priority projects. And that's a discipline that we started then, relatively simple, but again, I really, really find if there's that many, all organisations are busy, and we were a particularly busy and complex organisation, and it was easy for people to get distracted. So I think the big message was, when there are priority things, make sure you can keep the focus on it. And we still keep with this process today. We have a board. We're run just like a private company, other than we're government owned, and certainly this discipline we go through with the board to make sure there's agreement and alignment on our priorities. And I feel that it's really served us well in terms of focusing on those things, and certainly we have a very, very rigorous follow-up and monitoring process with the management team every quarter to understand how we're going and achieving those priorities. Other new disciplines I mentioned, again, you have a lot of dashboards and you look at your finances, but you never look at them more closely until things are going bad. Immediate monthly dashboards that come out that go to all managers to say, please explain where there's variations. And that's, again, that discipline is now embedded throughout the organisation, and something that we all discuss to make sure that we're on track where we're going, and being able to respond immediately where there's a need to do it. I mentioned greater accountability and scrutiny on expenditure items, and certainly a concerted effort on expenditure control. I've also mentioned reducing the priorities, and I can't overemphasise the importance of doing that. And simplification. I think as you grow, particularly when you go into a framework where you've got the Australian Business Framework, which is quite a complex framework with a lot of initiatives in it, as I said, your organisation can become very, very complex, and sometimes you really start wondering, what am I doing that for? Why am I making it so hard? But you keep doing it because you're on that path. Certainly we had a great focus around saying, let's make it more simple. Let's really try and simplify what we're doing and reduce that complexity. Some of that came through our restructuring of the organisation, making sure that there was, I guess, great understanding of where people's roles and responsibilities were, particularly in the operational areas where we've got a workforce now of about 300, 150 of those are blue collar, 150 white collar, making sure that those responsibilities were known. Moving safety into those areas rather than in the head office where we only had reps in that area, driving safety improvement through the operational areas, and certainly from a business improvement perspective where we had people dedicated to business improvement and quality and continuous improvement from a corporate level. Again, we've devolved those down into the key business areas so that there were people driving improvement at the shop floor level. And that worked really, really well. So that transition was sort of coming from getting that framework right, getting it into the organisation, and then it was very much the deployment, making sure it happened down more at the shop floor level. A huge focus on people, and I'm very proud of the people that work at Fremantle Ports. I get on with them all extremely well. I think we have a wonderful culture and a great working relationship, and there's great camaraderie, pride for the organisation, a good community spirit and the like, which I think are all the hallmarks of an organisation that is destined to continue being successful. Certainly we highly recognise that our people contribute to this. We have a lot of emphasis on recognition and reward and celebration, and the exec team is really charged with the responsibility, and the management team, to make sure that that culture continues. When we went through that change at that time, back in 2008, we hadn't undertaken a cultural survey. We certainly had done employee satisfaction survey and had a great focus on employees, but certainly we saw that we wanted to focus on the culture a bit more and started on the LSI work. Certainly at that time, a reason for it was to make sure we had that focus on the blue. I won't go through all of these. This is, I guess, is a summation of what we saw as being the key principles of the way we operated at that time. I've mentioned more of them, but I think certainly one of the things which was my big mantra was around making sure the bottom four came about. The top 4 and 5 are all process driven, but the big thing I did with the management team is I want enthusiastic and energetic people in my workforce. And that was something that it's not something that you can just sort of pour water on and watch it grow. You've got to really work with it. If your management team is not energetic and enthusiastic about their work, it's pretty hard to expect that the people below them share that sort of, or show that those sort of attributes. So that was something I really wanted to see. Certainly making sure that people weren't stifled in adding to the organisation. And again, that's something that's not easy to make sure happens, but you've got to make sure you have the right performance development processes and the right to do it. Making sure that people knew that they were accountable for what they do and what they did. And again, that's something that's critical, because if people aren't all pulling their weight, it doesn't work that way. And I don't think anyone should be allowed to slack off and not contribute properly. My words, which are always very, very harsh, if you want to complain about the organisation and don't like the way things are doing and done, there's plenty of other jobs out there, mate, go and find one, and I'll help you find one. And I think that's not being overly brutal, but if people don't want to be there and they don't enjoy their work and don't come to work with enthusiasm and energy, then please move on somewhere else. I think, again, communication is a really, really important thing, and at that time spent a lot of time doing it. So what we did from a cultural perspective, as I said, we hadn't gone into a cultural survey. We looked at the LSI stuff and really said, where do we want to be? We had the executive team, and I'm sure many organisations here have sort of gone through this, try to define the culture that they saw as being right, sharing that with staff, doing the cultural survey, looking at where the issues were for improvement, and I guess making sure that improvement plan was identified. The executive team, it's a small executive team. myself and 4 to 5 general managers, varies depending on what business we're in. We very much looked at our own LSIs and how we can improve and things that we can do. And we all shared them with our staff to make sure they understood areas where we could improve and they could assist us to bring about that improvement. On your left, you will see the preferred culture. Now, that's not unexpected. Everyone wants to be like that. That's the way we measured ourselves in 2008. And the actual culture that came out, with 286 people responding, was a little bit different from that, but it still was encouraging. I mean, it wasn't slash your wrist stuff. There's quite a bit of blue in there, but certainly you can see quite a lot of red and quite a lot of green. Now, as we all know, some elements of red and green are very important and very good, and I'm the first one to admit that and encourage people to have those attributes. Certainly we could see from that we could build on the blue, and also I think the most important thing is to make sure, in the green area where there's those defensive and cautious type attributes, that those things are worked on. When you looked at the different divisions, you can see generally that the results were pretty similar, that there was, areas where you could work on to help reduce red and reduce green and also build blue. So that's spread across the whole organisation in terms of the different, functions and areas that we operate. Most favourable areas, it was good to see the people work. People felt empowered. People felt that they were involved in goal setting and doing things, that they weren't blamed for mistakes, they were encouraged, they were trained and developed. So a lot of those things are blue attributes, and I guess that recognised why we did score pretty well in the blue. However, there were some areas where we needed work. Some of them surprised me, some of them, particularly in the group areas where they were done, there was great surprise, but they were areas that we looked at and worked on. The internal customer service, making sure that each of the different areas, branches, managers work together to make sure that they're all focused on achieving the right things, and acting on those priorities I think helped on that. Making sure that performance was managed, getting rid of those people that weren't contributing or encouraging them to perform better. And I guess, again, everyone loves reward and recognition, and it's such an important thing. And although I thought, this is my greatest surprise, although I thought we had a very mature and well advanced and a lot of engagement in that, it obviously still needed more work. So we developed, from a corporate level, a Growing the Blue program. It was something that we thought was great, aimed at building on those things that I mentioned before where there was work needed, and that was at the highest level. So we shared all that with our staff. Certainly from an executive team commitment perspective, I got very, very strong commitment that we were to work with our branches and areas in driving those improvements and bringing about that change. There's no point doing the survey and doing nothing about it. You've got to really think about the things you can do to help bring about change in each of those areas. And a lot of time we spent an exec team discussing those initiatives and making sure that executive work with each of their areas to target the things to bring about, to understand the issues and to bring about real improvement, and reporting back to the executive in terms of how they're going. From my perspective, that's how I thought I was. I thought I was very blue. I knew I was red and green in certain areas, but I certainly thought I was pretty blue. What others thought of me was actually relatively similar to what I thought of myself, which was a pleasing thing. Where I needed to work was on my red and green, and I really tried hard to do that. And I've got a general manager in the room with me now. Whenever I did things that were red behaviours, that were bad red behaviours, they'd come and tell me straight away. And I encouraged them to tell me. They'd go, "Chris, that is a bit red." And I listened to it. I really listened to it. And it really helped. So I worked hard on some of those things. Some of the things in the red area I think are really important. Where it's green, again, I think a lot of that's making sure that things aren't stifled in the organisation and there's not a defensive response to things as well. But I worked hard, and pleasingly my results improved over a 3-year period in what my direct reports perceived my behaviour to be. From the executive team, pleasingly the same thing. So their profile again on the left in 2009, and the profile in 2011, where you can see a significant growth in the blue and a reduction in the green. Again, as about the executive group, this was my view of them in 2009. Now you can see my view was pretty similar to theirs. So I saw a lot of green behaviour that I was trying to get rid of. And when I measured them again, you can see the change that was there. And that was about coming through their endeavour and commitment to bring about change and to work on those things together to try and solve those areas which we saw as stifling the organisation. So, you know, I was very pleased, obviously, with the change that they put. Our executive from their direct reports, again, I won't go through all of these, but this hasn't got a whole lot of change, but this is from our management team effectively, about 30 people, the way that they perceive the executive. You know, not as dramatic change as you see in other areas, but certainly stronger emphasis on the blue and growing through. And from our peers, what we thought of each other and the like, again, quite a big improvement. So in my mind, you know, that's been a great thing that we've been able to achieve in a pretty limited time and really brought about, after having a strong framework in place from the Australian Business Excellence Framework, to really focusing on the culture and the people to help overcome the issues that we faced as a business where, you know, again, it was a dramatic change and it gave me that change when I had a new government and a new minister and a new chairman and a GFC. It gave me a platform to do something about it. And I think the focus that we took was on the way we did our business, but also in terms of the culture of the organisation. The big thing, I mentioned the executive team, but having the management team on board is incredibly important. You need them to be setting the example in the organisation to want to drive improvement and change. And that, I think, you know, for all leaders is a critical thing to do. If you haven't got their ownership and accountability and getting them having that enthusiasm, it's not going to work. We sat down as a management team, which I told you is about 30 or so, and we made sure that we agreed what our commitment was. And the pleasing thing to me, and the management team's been there together for quite a long time, you know, when we started on this sort of thing, they were searching for what their goal was. They knew what their role was in the organisation. They knew what the executive team was doing. What that management team did, there was a bit uncertain to them what their role was. So I got a commitment from them to certain things that they put down as being the things that they saw that they'd be committing to do. And we also saw that this was their role in the organisation. So their role was, through good leadership, to operate as a cohesive team to set and achieve the goals of the organisation by doing those sorts of things. Now, we sat down with 30 people and we agreed this in about half an hour. And, you know, that's one thing that I helped. We weren't a management team that was diverse and at odds with each other. We had a good common focus, and it was great that people agreed this. This piece of paper with those 2 slides on it, I'll bring to the management team every 3 months and ask how we're going on this. Are you living up to your commitment? Are you doing these things? And that's the only way that I think you can help drive change and improvement, to keep reinforcing the importance of it, but keep measuring how you do it. The role in managers in changing culture was an amazing and a very important thing. I won't read all those things there. We had a good leadership program. We involved work group discussions all the time in improvement. Certainly, again, reward and recognition there, effective performance management. And again, who are your customers? How are you adding value to what you're doing for your customers? And one big thing I'm about for managers is authenticity. And I heard Sean mention that earlier on today. That is the most important thing. If you're not a believable manager in what you're trying to sell, forget about it. You can't get the people to do what it is. And that's one of the most important traits. That is authenticity, enthusiasm and energy in terms of getting people to come on board and do things. Building the momentum on those things, we had a good coaching program, a buddy program, managers teamed up together to share their problems and successes and work together. And, you know, it's good if you know, rather than, you know, you've got one person that you can build a relationship with and talk about those things over time. And a lot of those things. But I think, you know, for the managers, the most important thing, I would say, is getting them to recognise what their role is in the organisation, and it's a critical role. You know, again, I've been very pleased that that's worked. How do we go with all that? I think we had some great success when you look at the different operational areas when we measured in 2009 to 2012. If you look at the group at the bottom, which is the port operational group, if you look at the red and the green that was there and how that changed through to 2012, it's phenomenal. And there's a lot of people in those groups. So, you know, that's the sort of emphasis that I think, you know, that's where you want to get to. And as I said, the journey over the 3 to 4 years was very much through consistent engagement by the management team with their work groups, because those changes aren't going to be brought about when the people are filling out the survey if they don't believe them, believe me. They've got to be a part of bringing about that change and recognising the importance of that change and the benefits of that change. So with all that in place, over the last 5 years, the results have been very pleasing. We finished major projects, we deepened the harbour, all the plume's gone. You know, we've created the port from a container perspective to cater for the next 15, 20 years. You know, it was a very, very big project, high profile, and, you know, that dredge, as Steve will know, if you had it stand up for one day, it would cost you $70,000 a day. So you couldn't have any delay in what you were doing. But we went through with, you know, that change, bringing about major projects. We did it on budget, within environmental conditions and without any safety incidents, and that was a great outcome. And again, that was focusing on the priorities and the parts that are in it as part of applying those leadership principles. We created the land, we built the berth, and now we can get the Panamax size ships fully loaded coming into the port. And I guess, you know, when you're spending that sort of money, it's good to see that this actually occurs now. It's not really a joke, but before we did the deepening, the ships that were coming in were actually scraping the bottom of the harbour. And that's how much we needed to deepen. With technology these days, you can, with underkill, dynamic underkill clearance technology, you can actually bring a ship in with that much under the water, but we're actually sometimes hitting the bottom. So it was a project that was well needed. We deepened a lot, and again, that sets us up for the next 15 years. Working with the rail providers and others to get more on rail is critical for our future. It's a hard slog, but we're certainly working on that and trying to do it. And you can see the challenges we're facing in Fremantle. I love this slide because where that train runs, and that's the only line into the port, in that salmon-y coloured building next to it, they're apartments. They can touch the train running past. So working with the community, as you can see, in that sort of environment from a sustainability perspective is a very important thing. Recently, also, we've delivered a big project down in KWINANA with a big upgrade at our KWINANA bulk terminal, whereby we've invested and provided now for the export of iron ore through there. We're certainly not trying to tackle what Dampier and Headland do, but we've got 3 to 4 million tonnes of iron ore going through that port, and again, a major upgrade to our facilities, embraced well by our people working at that facility. So, result-wise, trade's gone well, it's grown strongly. Ship visits have grown strongly, gone up the right way in recent years. Operating profit's done a great leap. Our return on assets has grown very, very well, and I guess they're all the good signs. So all the hard work has worked on the results. And I guess that, again, for the team is the most important thing. If they're all going the other way, it's also important for myself, but I mean, for the team, it's an important thing to see that they're going in the right direction, and the hard work they're all putting into getting staff to be a part of that is worthwhile. We will always have challenges, and we've got some, you know, good ones at the moment that we've got to work through. These, from a cultural perspective, we have got a very militant union operating in the port, and building engagement with a staff that is unionised is a very hard thing. It's a difficult thing for the managers, and it's a difficult thing for me. It's a thing for me from a personal perspective that frustrates me the most. That, you know, to have them on my side is something that I can never guarantee. They have an ownership and a desire to back the union no matter what the union says. And I'm saying that pretty strongly, but from my perspective, that's the sort of thing you're battling against. So we'll keep working on it. Getting youth into the workforce is a critical thing. We've got a great ageing workforce. All the same sort of stuff, but they're good cultural challenges, and they're things that we'll keep doing, continuing to do through growing the blue. I always like leaving it with these things. You know, I think some of them, they're traits that I like to live by. I always think that where you have a challenge, do treat it as an opportunity. Some of these are sort of quite common comments, but in my mind, they're very important. Accept and share responsibilities, set priorities, celebrate success, so important. Set challenging yet realistic goals. Motivate by serving as a role model. No one's going to grow the blue if you're walking around like a red or a green person. And as I said, there's nothing better for you to ask your people to tell you when you're displaying those bad behaviours, if you can take it, but you're not going to make it if you can't take it. And it's a great thing to challenge that too, so am I really being read? Pursue those goals with commitment, enthusiasm and discipline. Keep it simple. Communicate where you can. And this one I picked up from a guy from Harvard, Robert Goffey. Be yourself, but be yourself with more skill. Because that's the most important thing. You know, we've all got weaknesses. I've got a huge number of them. I've got a lot of positive strengths, but I think it's really making sure you know what your strengths and weaknesses are and doing that with skill. And most importantly, for yourself and in your organisation, have fun. So I hope that was informative to you and you learnt something. And I hope you all cheer really hard for the Fremantle Dockers this weekend. Thank you.